Welcome to the Teaching Change Podcast, where we explore issues of social entrepreneurship education and innovation. I'm one of your hosts, Jerrid Calicay.
And I'm your other host, Courtney Moore. On today's episode, we will discuss the topic of self-care. Those in the social entrepreneurship field, education, as well as many other professions are driven by need to serve others and to correct what is wrong with the world. However, it is just important for those individuals to make sure they are maintaining their own well-beings in the process. Right, Jerrid?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, how do you continually serve others and try to conquer the world and save the world in some respects and not take care of yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That reminds me of the warning they give on the airplanes, in the unfortunate circumstance, and hopefully this never happens to anyone, if the oxygen masks come down from the ceiling, you're supposed to put on your oxygen mask first before you help others, So I think that is one of the key foundations of self-care, to make sure that you are maintaining your physical and your mental health while you are helping and serving others.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I guess it would be beneficial if we define what self-care is, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many maybe potentially misunderstandings. It's certainly a buzzword.
It certainly is.
In the helping professions, in the educational field, etc. So, Courtney, what is your definition of self-care?
My definition of self-care is just checking in with yourself and making sure that you are taking care of your personal needs first. Because I think that a lot of times we are driven by our need to make sure that everyone else is okay. And in those types of circumstances, we might ignore what's going on with ourselves. So it's just important to make sure that you're taking time to check in with yourself and that you are seeing to your needs. So that's my definition. How about your definition, Jerrid?
Yeah, well, I think mine's almost identical.
Mm-hmm.
It's making sure that you have taken care of your psychosocial, emotional well-being as much as anybody else. And so you're not working 80 hours a week, ignoring your family, ignoring your health, ignoring your own body in order to do the work that you're doing. And I know that's a lot easier said than done for all of us.
Right.
And we all suffer from a lack of self-care a lot of times. But it is really important because, especially in social entrepreneurship and with social entrepreneurs, when they're trying to push a boulder quite literally up a hill, they need to be able to take moments for themselves and they need to work on their self-care. Otherwise, it's not a sustainable solution. It wouldn't be a sustainable solution. They're going to, their bodies are going to break down. Their lives are going to break down if they don't concentrate on getting what they need, whatever that might be. I think a lot of times people pigeonhole self-care as in, I'm going to get a massage, and
that could be part of it, Jerrid.
It could certainly be part of it, but it's not the only part. I don't know if we all have a colleague, but we certainly have colleagues that I'm going to, in higher education, there are some folks who are like, I take my dog for a walk, or I got a dog so I can have better work-life balance, or I'm going to go, get a massage once a semester because, the students just drive me crazy all semester, and so I get a massage once a semester and it makes me feel, everything's great. With that being said, self-care is really more about continually taking care of oneself in the work that you're doing. At least that's my take on it. Making sure that your cup is as full as it needs to be in order to give to others and help others in their endeavor. I think there's a really almost toxic belief system in at least the United States. I don't know about elsewhere, but at least in the United States, where I am working harder than everyone else and so I am a better employee.
Right.
And a lot of times they define that I'm working harder as more hours.
Yes.
Right?
I totally agree. Did I ever tell you about my adventures as a 7th and 8th grade middle school teacher?
No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I think I blocked those out. I had to retire after 2 years.
That was it, huh?
Yeah, that was it.
That's just a testament to how hard that work is.
It is super hard.
We love our teachers.
And my hat's off to those career teachers, especially in those grades, because it is really hard and difficult work indeed. And I found that, especially in education, that your workday doesn't end at 5 or whenever your class lets out. It's constantly with you. And so when I was the 7th and 8th grade middle school teacher, I would take work home with me. You know, I was never ever off the clock. And when that happens, you tend to burn out more quickly. So that's why I only lasted 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, because it's kind of hard to leave the work there when you leave school. So I think what you were saying about those employees that think like if they work harder, that means more hours, and that is really harmful to your health, because it was harmful to my health.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, and obviously, you know, if you're working an hourly wage job, you know, more hours certainly means more compensation, and so that's not necessarily what we're talking about.
Yes.
We're talking about mainly salary type positions,
yes.
and that kind of thing. Courtney, your experience in the K through 12 system, do you feel like you literally burnt out? I mean, I know you mentioned that's how people burn out, and then you...
I think I literally burned out. I lasted 2 years in that particular position. I think that it takes a lot out of you, because you have to be on, you know, when you are a teacher. It's like you are performing every day as well. And then with the K through 12 system, you deal a lot with classroom discipline as well. So on top of your daily duties, you know, you have to deal with classroom management. And with that particular age group, that becomes more interesting as well.
This was like the 13 to 15-ish range.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Exactly. So, and of course, you know, I want to say that I have some students from that era in my life that I remember quite fondly, you know. Yeah, you know, there were others that really made me earn my salary as well. But it takes a lot of your attention. It takes a lot of your mental power to be a teacher, and especially a teacher with that age group, you know. And so after 2 years, I was burned out, because it's hard to leave the work at the school, you know. You just bring it with you all the time, because you're always thinking about the next lesson that you could give to your students, or you're thinking about the next activity that you can give to your class. So it's just a constant mental cycle that you go through. Yeah. And
you know, I think what it sounds like is you couldn't find that balance, that work-life balance.
Right.
That's often, unfortunately, so elusive for so many of us.
Right.
And you couldn't have that self-care. You didn't have the opportunity to develop that work-life balance, to then develop that self-care regimen, whatever that might be.
Right.
And so you know, what could have been a lengthy career would end up being 2 years.
Yes. 2 whole years.
Which is a long time. It's all relative, right?
Yes.
It's a long time depending on who you talk to. You know, but I'm sure there's teachers listening who K through 12 and otherwise, who have been teaching for 30 years, and they're
my
like
heroes. Truly, they are my heroes.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and they're absolutely amazing. You know, I think the other thing that's really difficult is when we talk about self-care, it's also being rewarded justly for your work. You know, one of the things that I think is really, and I've never taught in the K through 12 system, I've only taught at the collegiate level, but one of the things that bothers me today about kind of our societal conversation, at least in the United States, around education, around teaching, is that teachers are not looked upon very respectfully. Everyone kind of wants to blame the teachers for the state of the nation, and certainly not in all walks of life, but we've continually put more and more pressure and more responsibilities on teachers to fix our educational system. And really, they're just part of it. They're not the end all be all. And we've continually made decisions, policy decisions and otherwise, here in the state of Florida and also in the entire country, in the United States, that continually puts more and more responsibilities and more blame on the teachers without giving them any kind of rewards or any benefits. Teachers in the United States are infamously low-paid workers.
Amen. They sure are.
And that adds to it. I mean, it becomes a very difficult thing to have self-care at any level if you're not even being rewarded for the time you're in the school. Let alone, as you mentioned, Courtney, most teachers are working around the clock because they're planning lessons and they're doing all these extra things, grading papers, and all these things that don't happen during the normal, 8 to 2 o'clock when the kids are in your classroom thing. But they're not even being compensated for that time. Well, I mean, they're being paid, barely a livable wage, and in some cases, not even that. And then we turn around, as policymakers, the politicians and so forth. Then some of them decide to turn around and blame them for not doing something and not doing this or doing that. So, I think that becomes part of it. I think it becomes part of the equation that becomes very difficult for you to stay in that profession. One of the things that I like about social entrepreneurship, one of the many things, is that social entrepreneurs tend to be compensated at a higher level, at least once they get things moving, because a social entrepreneur has earned revenue. They're not dependent on policymakers as much. They're not dependent on grants, and they're not dependent solely on philanthropy and donors. They have the earned revenue, and so they can create a relatively stable and good existence. Now, there's probably a bunch of social entrepreneurs that are either starting out or having some difficulties or have had difficulties that are saying to themselves, Jerrid, you have no idea. And so you're right in some cases. That's not always a golden ticket, so to speak. But with that being said, once you get moving and once you get things started and going and running well, you can find a decent level of compensation and work-life balance and some other things, provided you're concerned about that. And that's my word of caution to anyone that's listening that says, those things are nice theoretically, but there's no way I'm ever going to have self-care. There's no way I'm going to ever have work-life balance. I don't even know what that means. I would encourage you to reevaluate your priorities and reevaluate how you're doing your work. I had a good colleague of mine at a previous institution that I worked at, who would regularly put in 60, 70 hours, maybe 80 on some weeks.
Wow.
I mean, just was
like a lot.
Was there all the time. I mean, was in the office all the time. And she worked in a student services, student affairs area at one point. And so she was just always there in the office working hard. And early on in my career, I did the same. Trying to prove yourself, trying to make sure you're a good professional and that you're doing things right. And then I came to a realization that, post 50 hours, I wasn't operating on the same level. Meaning I wasn't 100%. And every hour I spent beyond that threshold for me, it just was kind of a depleting return. It was diminishing returns. So if I spent, 40 hours over my normal 40 hours and I spent 80 hours in the office, that last 40 I was, maybe a quarter of what I should have been in terms of performance. And so I started to realize that, if I scale back the number of hours I spend in the office, I could have a real opportunity to increase the productivity and the efficiency and effectiveness of the hours I do spend in the office. And then I realized that was the way to go. And so I started to do that. Unfortunately, my colleague did not do that. And my understanding, I don't work with her any longer, and I'm not in regular contact with her, but my understanding is she's still working 70, 80 hours a week.
No.
And I would argue that she's probably not any more effective than the person that works 40 hours a week. Yes, she's there more often, but that doesn't mean that she's being more effective. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's a belief there, like I said earlier, there's a toxic belief kind of in our society that the more hours you put in, the harder worker you are, the better work you are. And that's not always the case. Unless you're working on like kind of a job where if you're there, you're productive automatically, and if you're not there, you're not productive, which is very few jobs. Then I would argue you're not being as productive as you can be. But if when you have conversations with your friends, your friends and colleagues in other disciplines and other fields of work, they're likely going to have somewhat the same sense or the same feeling that the more hours I put in, the better employee I am. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case.
I agree. That is definitely not the case. So I'm interested. So I've heard a little bit about your burnout story and then how you kind of reflected and reduced your hours. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do to practice self-care?
Yes. Well, I'm not the best example.
Minds want to
know. We are all, I think, searching for a better routine. I mean, so when I talked about reprioritization and prioritizing, I came to the point in my career that I started to think about what really my priorities are. And my priorities, first and foremost, are to spend time with my family and raise good children. I have 3 children, and my main priority is to be a good husband and a good father to them. And then to be a good family man in general to my nephews and my parents, who are luckily both still with us, and so forth. And that's my number one priority. Below that or beyond that is to be a good employee in whatever area I'm working in, And so I take my job very seriously here at the college. I enjoy my job immensely. We've been able to do a lot of really great things in social entrepreneurship education here at Valencia College. And so that's a huge priority for me. But at the point that my job starts to interfere with my family and gets to the point where it would interfere with my family life or my schedule or my ability to be that good father and husband and family man, then I would have to eliminate the job.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm very, very serious about that. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's exactly what I did a number of years ago. I left a position because I was working on my doctorate and I was also working full time. Mm-hmm. And my job continually started to make more and more demands on me. Not as the 9 to 5 work life, but, or even once in a while in the evening, but they were regularly making more and more demands on me that was harming me. It was harming my mental health. It was harming my family life and so forth. And I had already done that. I had already gone through the trials and tribulations of that kind of scenario. And so I decided that it wasn't worth it. Mm-hmm. And I walked away from it. Now, it's a scary proposition when you have a family or kids, or even if you're just single and by yourself. It's a scary thing to walk away from a job. But I think more people have to be willing to do that. Right. And when we talk about self-care, we're talking about overall self-care. I have a really good friend that I met in my doctoral program who worked for a company for 20 something years. And in his work, at some point, I think about halfway through that 20-year tenure, he really started to not gel and not believe in the company culture and not really believe in the company itself.
And that was after 20 years?
After about 10 years.
Okay,
about 10 years in, he kind of came, he was, growing as we all are and kind of coming into his own and he started to realize that the company that he was working for wasn't necessarily a really great company. And their values weren't aligned with his, and the company culture he didn't really like a whole lot. But, at this point, he's a C-suite executive. I think he got to the point where he was I think he was one of the associate or assistant vice presidents. And so he just hung out. He just hung on for the next 10 years. He did his work, but didn't believe in it. And when I met him, he was about 2 years away from leaving when I met him. And in that 2 years, I think he started to come to the realization that the job was really harming him.
Mm-hmm.
It was harming his health. It was harming his life and his his emotional health, his mental health. And he decided to leave. In the time that we were in our doctoral program, he left the company and went and he's pursuing other things. Now, it's a scary proposition because he was making, probably well into the six figures at the time.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it sounds really amazing, but he was hollow and dead inside, at least kind of how he described it to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, six figures sounds really amazing, right?
Yeah.
But you got to look at the total package. You got to look at what does that require you to do?
Right.
And anyone that has not made six figures says, "Oh wow, six figures! I would just about do anything."
Right.
Yeah, that might be your feeling now, but once you get there
mm-hmm.
and you're doing it, you start to realize it's not worth it.
Right.
Not really.
Right.
And so long story short, he ended up leaving and went and became the executive director of a nonprofit and did some other things. And he's still trying to kind of find his way. But that's, I'm sure that was a scary proposition, but overall, he's happier.
Mm-hmm.
He was miserable, and now, he's miserable making six figures,
mm-hmm.
and now he's, making probably a lot less. I don't know exactly, but
right.
making less money. Certainly, there's a lot less certainty in it,
mm-hmm.
But he's happier,
mm-hmm.
right? And so, social entrepreneurs need to make some of the same decisions as we all do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the work that we're doing is not easy. The work that they're pursuing is not easy. It's pushing a boulder up a hill or a mountain or up a cliff, depending on your scenario. And we need to make some decisions on what makes sense for us. And if we're not taking the time out to take care of ourselves, then ultimately our bodies and us will shut down. And that's just the fact of the matter. You've been listening to Teaching Change, where we explore issues of social entrepreneurship, education, and innovation. Today's episode was all about self-care and the things you can do to try to take care of yourself while you're pushing that boulder up a hill.
Find us online at teachingchangepodcast.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, be happy
and change some stuff.